Yo, what's good, YouTube? It's boardzy, and what if I told you that Pulsar made a zowie mouse? You would probably be shocked, but that is pretty much exactly what we have here with the Pulsar Xlite V3 Esports Edition, but I will also be covering the base edition for the non-esports professional layman in my audience. But yeah, it's really impossible to talk about this release without likening it to zowie. EC2 shape is obviously what the Xlite has been inspired by for years, but this time they were like, fuck just the shape. Let's inspire the rest of the mouse's design based off zowie. So esports plug and play approach it's just a way to go about a mouse. All of the settings are adjustable on the mouse. They have this OLED screen at the bottom that displays your DPI, battery life, and polling rate. You can just click the polling rate button to adjust it here. It is 4K in wired, 8K in wired mode. But one just minor grievance is like, why doesn't this mouse show up in the software? Like, yeah, I get it's plug and play, but it's like, you could just have it show up in the software as well. I feel like that really would not have killed the whole plug and play philosophy, but you know, it is what it is. I was able to get the settings I want on this mouse, and then I kind of just didn't change it, which I guess is that's the esports philosophy approach, way of life. But yeah, one main difference is going to be the weight between the Xlite V3 ES and the zowie EC2. But even with this, Pulsar knows that they can make an extremely light mouse. The standard base version is at 54 grams, I believe, and the Xlite V3 ES comes in at 66. So they kind of found a medium point between 77 grams, which does feel really fucking heavy. Like when I use these mice head to head against each other, I'm like, Jesus, zowie mice really have some like heft to them. So if that's what you're looking for, you're still probably going to want to pick zowie. But the 66 gram weight feels really well balanced on the ES edition. Definitely feels similar in terms of weight to something like the GPX, which is even below 60 grams. So yeah, that's really the range you're going to be feeling when it comes to weight on the Xlite V3. The standard version is much lighter at 54 grams, and it doesn't feel poorly balanced, but when I'm gripping it, it just feels lighter towards the bottom of the mouse, and this obviously makes sense because we don't have a lot going on the standard version, but of course we have the OLED screen, which is adding a pretty significant amount of weight, I'm sure, towards the bottom of the mouse. So what I'm trying to say is, in hand, this mouse feels good. The build quality is super fucking solid. Will I say it is 100% as solid as a zowie mouse? No, because like when I do squeeze as hard as I can feel the plastic like flexing inward. So I'd say it's like 90% as solid, but this does feel like a slightly denser, no it doesn't. I was gonna say it feels like a denser plastic than the Xlite V3, but it just feels a little bit fucking heavier. But yeah, I'm not gonna lie, for an ergo mouse, especially an EC clone, this is a really typical weight. We have the Model D, which does not feature like a similar coating that would add like a gram or two of weight, coming in at 61 grams. This is a slightly larger mouse than the V3 ES. Death Error V3 Pro comes in at 64 grams, once again slightly larger of a mouse. So yeah, I mean, this is not really anything that is going to freak you out if you're just used to the weight of a standard ergo. Obviously the tech is going to be better, but one place where I feel it falls short is just the click feeling itself. And it's not that the clicks feel too heavy, they're unusable in game, but when you directly compare it with a zowie mouse, even though this is on 1K polling, I'm sure that the like latency numbers are higher on zowie, just because of how light the clicks themselves are to activate. When I'm playing like a clicking scenario, I just feel like the zowie mouse is more responsive, and I imagine that this is amplified a lot like in TAC FPS, because I get people all the time like, oh, you just don't understand, zowie shapes are perfectly comfortable, the clicks are better than anything else, and this is always from like fucking CS players. So I mean, I am not going to say that this absolutely kills zowie mice, so it just does feel like, in my hand, which is adjusted to more modern mice, it just feels like a better version of a zowie mouse. Quality wise, there's really nothing to nitpick. I know with a Pulsar product, people think these things are like going to give you the black plague, but with both of my copies, I really don't have any issues. When it comes to like the actual quality of the buttons or the tensioning, you can see that there is a good amount of pre-travel, which probably does like assist in making the click lighter, but it just does have that fake artificial like optical tactility and sharpness. And yeah, I just don't notice these clicks being as responsive as the zowie buttons. And this is a lot of rambling about that, but I feel like that is a pretty big factor of the mouse. The side buttons feel very light, almost soft. They have a kind of zowie-esque post-travel feeling, but I also noticed that the standard Xlite buttons feel the same. So I think that this is an update from the V2 to V3, just like lighter feeling, slightly better side buttons. I'm not in love with the positioning, especially of mouse 4. I feel like it's just a bit too far back and too high up on the mouse. But yeah, the coating of the mouse, I feel like I have not talked about this. It is obviously a fingerprint magnet They went from on like the X2 boardzy Zebra Edition, it's more of like a dry rubberized matte coating. This definitely competes more with zowie. It's going to be, I mean, even it feels wetter than a zowie coating. It feels pretty similar, honestly. But if you do have sweaty hands, or I mean, for me, like the heat came on in my apartment, so it makes my hands more sweaty. This is going to have a more wet, somewhat slippery feeling, but it's weird because I feel like the coating also like locks in my fingers on the mouse. And yeah, compared to the standard version, this definitely just does feel a bit more dry and plasticky. I'm not 100% sure if this even has a coating. I do believe it does, so I don't think it's just the standard plastic. So yeah, maybe the ES edition feels a little bit more premium due to the coating, but this is not, like, in my opinion, the best coating on the market. And I do think it was mainly implemented to just give the mouse a more zowie-like feeling when you just like put your fingers on it. The scroll wheel was another big change. This is an aluminum scroll wheel, and this is just not very common in like normal plastic mice. Like if you rub your finger across this horizontally, there's no grip whatsoever. I mean, thankfully that's not really how you scroll a wheel, but this is going to have a moister, just slippery feeling to it than most wheels. If you're used to like a rubber wheel, even on the standard version, I just don't know how the aluminum one is like significantly better, really. It does sound and feel a bit more muted. It feels almost lubed. The individual steps, it's not impossible to notice them, but it's just like this is a more loose feeling scroll wheel, and it's really like the opposite of a zowie experience, which I find interesting because they're like, this is clearly Pulsar's take on a zowie mouse, but then you just have a scroll wheel where there's like not really defined steps, versus zowie, which is known for their super notchy wheels. So do I think it's like a terrible wheel implementation? Not really, but I mean, as someone who can generally appreciate a mouse gimmick, this aerospace grade aluminum wheel, I'm just not like really that sold on it. I'll do a sound test of all of the buttons compared with zowie. And yeah, guys, I mean, there are some other aspects of the mouse to cover, but ultimately, this is an EC2 clone in the mid 60 gram range. It really does not get any more generic than that when it comes to just like shape and weight experience. Like, this is going to feel like a fucking ergo. The other aspects of the mouse are really what differentiates it from the pack. Something like the Model D, it's really the same exact thing in terms of specs as Pulsar. They're using optical switches. It's 4K wireless, 8K wired. This does not feature a similar coating. This is just like the standard, somewhat textured, rough, glorious plastic. And yeah, it comes with a 4K dongle, so it's really just like, which of these slight shape differences do you want? I don't even know if that's how people are determining like which ergo to get. I would say Pulsar quality over time, like it might hold up better, but the builds to me do feel very similar, where if I squeeze as hard as I can get the plastic to flex a little bit, but it's just nothing where it's like super noticeably different in hand. I personally prefer the Xlite V3, but it's not like the Model D is trash. I do think the side button implementation is better, the clicks are lighter, so it really just is going to come down to personal preference. The standard version versus the ES edition, I mean, as I've been saying, if you want something that comes closer to just a zowie mouse in all aspects of feel, go with the ES. It is the higher price point, but if you are just on like a budget for a wireless ergo, ignore this like dot skate abomination. I put them on when I was like half asleep. I'm like, fuck it, I'm just gonna keep this up. But yeah, ultimately at $90, I believe this mouse is at. It's not bad for an ergo. It's a lightweight ergo. Pretty much everything aside from the different things I've mentioned, like the scroll wheel and the coating, are going to be very similar to the ES edition. And I would say for the average person, the ES edition is not going to be worth the price increase. This obviously does not have 8K polling in wired mode, but genuinely, like, who the fuck uses that? I seriously, like, that's a feature where it's like, yeah, I guess if you can implement it, it's cool to have, but I just don't get it. I used the ES edition with the wire for a little bit. I'm like, man, I just hate the feeling of the wire. Went back to wireless, never looked back. And yeah, I feel like a lot of people are going to ask whether the standard version or the Lamzu Thorn is a better buy. And I mean, these are functionally the same performance-wise, and they are both ergos in the low 50 gram weight range. So it's just going to come down to which shape you prefer. I am pretty outspoken against the Lamzu Thorn for claw grip, at least with my hand size. And people are saying you need smaller hands. My issue is that the mouse is too fucking like bulky and high profile. How is having a smaller hand going to make that better? It is truly just a palm grip mouse, and it's an incredible one at that. But yeah, if you are claw gripping, at least personally, I have a much better experience with the Xlite V3 ES shape. I mean, ergos in general are just dead and boring. Like, all of these mice are functionally the same shape. And then you have like a few of them that are more out there, but like the EC clone market, I'm not going to pretend like this is where my passion is in gaming mice. Like, yeah, all of these are going to feel solid. You can ultimately just buy a standard Zowie EC2. They have actually lowered the price from what was originally $150, which is a pretty crazy price, down to $120 on Amazon. So yeah, if you are in the market for just that true Zowie experience, which clearly just can't be replicated one-to-one. Like, yes, this does feel like kind of the newer version of it. It has higher pulling, a slightly lower weight, optical switches, but it just doesn't feel like a true Zowie mouse in hand. So if you do want that, that is always an option. But yeah, there's a fucking sea of clones available. My go-to would probably be Death Adder V3 Pro, which isn't a direct clone, followed by the Xlite V3 ES, followed by the Model D, followed by, I guess, the base version of the Xlite. Am I missing any EC clones, guys? But yeah, I don't know how else I can really evaluate this mouse. I did notice that it's listed as 1mm wider than the standard Xlite on Pulsar's website, and I thought I was going crazy. In my head, I was just saying, like, the shape feels a little bit different. I attribute it to the coating, which can kind of just alter the way that a mouse feels, but I'm not sure if the shapes are actually different. But it, like, yeah, it'll feel one-to-one in hand, but it also has the capacity to not feel one-to-one in hand. And I feel like I'm just truly showing that I am a deranged mouse reviewer at this point, which is probably where I should give the mouse the seal of approval. Because, I mean, I gave it to the Model D2 Pro, and I feel like these are absolutely on the same level, if not a bit better than that. Is it the most exciting mouse of all time? I think clearly not. I don't want it to seem like the clicks are too heavy, by the way, if I made it seem that way, but they just definitely are noticeably heavier than a Zowie mouse, which I feel like is what this should be mostly compared to, and it is a pretty big difference when it comes to that. Am I saying this is something I'm not adjusted to? No. Am I saying you can't get adjusted to it? I'm not saying that either, but I'm just saying out of the box you will notice that these do not have a similar click feeling to Zowie. And yeah, the base version at $100, I will still like recommend it to people who are looking for a cheap lightweight EC2 clone, but it's not something that is going to be getting a ton of use from me. It does still have a distinctly like somewhat cheaper feeling than the esports edition in hand, but it is still a big leap over the Xlite V2, which I think had a 3370, kind of worse feeling side buttons, and of course had some cutouts on the shell as well. So yeah, that's really where I'm at with the Xlites. Let me know what you guys think, because the Xlite V3, this was a very highly requested release, and then it comes out and it is what it is. Not a bad offering from Pulsar. They will have different sizes in the future, of course, but currently I think they launched them with the mediums. I think both versions will get a small and large version as well. But yeah, make sure to let me know what you guys think. Leave a like and subscribe if you enjoyed, and to see more mouse reviews in the future. But that is going to be all. Peace.